Nitin's never say die approach, yeah, just his never say die approach, combined with his humility and his ability to convert thoughts, concepts into action. I think that's the one that really stands out to me, for me, as far as Nitin is concerned, So Nitin joined Unilever at Hindustan Lever Limited straight out of campus, after his MBA. And he has stayed with Unilever throughout. Yeah. He, at the age of 44, was the youngest ever appointed CEO of Hindustan Unilever Limited. Yeah. And then, of course, he went on to being the executive vice president for Unilever in South Asia. He went on to being president of Unilever Home Care Division, president of the Foods and Refreshments Division, and he's currently the COO for Unilever, and he's responsible for Unilever's global P&L. I don't even know what that means, Nitin, but I what the enormity of it is, but I'm like, wow, what all that entails, I can just imagine. But all of this is there is this whole quantifiable part of it, the designation part of it, which is very, which one can see on paper. But I think more than that, what stands out for me is Nitin's, even the awards he's received for blazing a trail for diversity. He's won the GG2 Hammer Award in 2019. And these are awards that are handed out to individuals who have broken through the glass ceiling. Yeah. So he got this in 2019. And, some of the previous winners were the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So he's with really, really august company. And like I said, it's not about concepts and theories. It's really about who the person is that is most delightful for me. And I have a story, which I think to me speaks much more about who he is than his biodata. And the story I have heard about is this 22, 23-year-old young lad who was in the fourth semester of his MBA degree. And like all MBA students who are just about to graduate and very keen to get a good placement. And he had this one particular very prestigious consulting organization that was on his wish list. And that company was known to recruit only all-rounders, which meant that one had to know about everything: dance forms, music, food, sports, and of course, one's own, subject of specialization, if one wanted to even be in the reckoning. So Nitin knew that this was on his wish list, and he had started preparing for this interview months before the interview, And sports was not an issue for him because he is a sportsman. He's an amazing cricketer. He was number 5 national player at table tennis. So sports wasn't an issue, but there were other elements that he had started studying and, making sure that he had them all on his, he knew it inside out. And his friends, they were really very inspired by him, that this guy is just so dedicated and making sure he gets whatever is needed so that he moves forward. Yeah. They really admired him. And he was doing very well academically too. And then 2 days before the interview, Nitin declares to his friends that all this all-rounder business is not for him. And it wasn't who he is, and he didn't enjoy all this memorizing for the sake of the interview. He told his friends that he will not put up this charade. And of course, his friends were aghast that, what's wrong with you? You'll miss out on this dream organization. But I think he just told them that, if they don't want me for who I really am, I'm better off not joining them. And that's just what he did in the interview. He told them, when he was asked some all-rounder kind of questions, he told them that, I know the answer to this one because I've memorized it, but that's not really me. If you have any questions on marketing, I'll be happy to, engage with them. And well, that organization offered him the job. It's a different matter that he didn't take up that job because he'd also interviewed with HUL then, and he joined HUL. But I believe that prestigious or consulting organization followed up with him for years to have him back. And that wasn't to be. But well, I think that's, that just speaks a lot for who Nitin is. And I realized that, for trailblazers, it's just so pertinent to have the courage to own one's own diversity. And through that owning of one's own diversity, one is able to hold and encourage others' diversity. I'm just so glad and proud, Nitin, to have you over here. Over to you. Looking forward to hearing from you. And as you step in, it'll be lovely for us to have a little time to also interact with you, Nitin, at the end of your talk. So if you could set aside some time for us to interact with you too. Yeah. People will be sending in their questions. I'll put them together and share them with you towards the end, if that's all right with you. Over to you, Nitin.
Sure. Thank you. What do I say? So firstly, thank you for inviting me and having me here at this summit. Listening to Sonali just now, two thoughts went through my mind. It is nice having a friend introduce you because they're generous and charitable in their comments about you. But it's also a double-edged sword. They remind you of how old you are narrating stories, which you might have forgotten by now. But thank you nevertheless. I have to say, two other thoughts struck me because I joined a little while before the session started, and I heard some of the comments that people were making about the summit. And the first thought that struck me was how, despite when I was asked by Sonali whether I would be willing to speak at this event, I readily agreed. Little did I know what I was agreeing to, because the prospect of speaking to an audience of experts in this field of applied behavioral science, to students, lifelong students of the subject, is not just daunting, but it is probably also foolhardy. I have made that mistake. I'm not going to compound matters by trying to talk about a subject where probably all of you have forgotten more than I will ever learn. Yeah. So that's not what I'm going to talk about. But there was something else that struck me, which probably makes me feel a little silly at this stage, which was just listening to how you felt about the last 5 days. And when I heard it was 5 days, the first thought was, my God, I am probably, you're probably at the end of your energy, wanting to actually get away to enjoy the balance of a Saturday. So I don't know whether I've been more foolhardy or some of you start feeling that you've been foolish, having spent the next hour, especially after everyone had such wonderful things to say about this event. And the best that I can do is not to destroy this wonderful experience that you had. I genuinely mean that, because I rarely have heard people offer such effusive praise about the quality of engagement, dialogue, content that you've had. So it's clearly wonderful. I hope I don't disappoint you too much in this spirit. I really mean it when I say that I don't have any theory, any framework, anything to offer to any of you which could be thought-provoking. But on the other hand, the reality is I have been in business for over 30 years. 3 decades of being in business, 3 decades of trying to raise performance, self-performance, team performance, large group performance, driving excellence, learning and growing through observation, through interactions, through my own experiences, my failures over a period of time. You have many when you work that long. So what I thought I would do is probably share with you some of my insights arising from all of this. It's impossible to capture 30 years of insights in a short period of time, but I thought I'd choose a framework of one failure, one glorious failure, as I call it, one adversity that I've encountered, and one chance encounter. A chance encounter, a degree of serendipity, and how all of these have come together to shape a point of view in me, shape a certain belief in me about the role that leaders can play, and how, if you get a few things right, magical outcomes can happen. Now, that's what I'd like to start and share with all of you. Now, Sonali did mention that I joined the company. I'd just give you a little bit of a background as to why and why I'm still there at the end of over 30 years. Some of it is just simply inertia. Newton said it a long time ago. But other than that, I joined this company over 30 years ago because at that stage, I genuinely felt privileged to have been chosen by Hindustan Lever. I am biased, I acknowledge it. I love this company, but I would be not too far off the mark if I said that at that point in time, it was probably the most iconic and the most admired company in the country. Frankly, I didn't know too much more, but this in itself was enough for me to want to join that company and demonstrate that I could belong to this organization. That's why I joined. But if 3 decades later I'm still there, it is not because it was the most admired company at that point in time. The 3 decades later, if I'm still there, is because of a certain belief, a certain philosophy that that company chooses to work with and operate by. A desire to be the most sustainable company in the world, a desire to demonstrate unequivocally that a sustainable business can also be a high-performing business, that there is no disconnect between the two. That's the journey that we are on. And truth be told, that debate has yet to be won. And therefore, I continue to be inspired and continue to work towards trying to demonstrate whether it's possible to run an organization which is genuinely with sustainability at its core, in its belief system, with zero compromise. In fact, this becomes the source of our advantage, helping us win in the future. In fact, this philosophy that this company has is underpinned by 3 beliefs, beliefs which are very dear to me, beliefs which are rooted in purpose. The first belief that we've got is that companies with purpose will last. Yeah, that's a belief we've got. We genuinely feel that the day will come. A day will come when society simply will not allow any company to operate if its actions are not overtly socially responsible. You will not be allowed to have any business strategy if it is also not socially responsible. That's a belief that we've got. I don't know whether it will be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, but the day will come. And we would like to build the muscle to demonstrate that before the time comes. Our second belief is that brands with purpose will grow. That's why we want our brands to be infused with meaning beyond the benefits that they deliver to consumers in their categories. And the third belief is that people with purpose thrive. Companies with purpose last, brands with people grow, and people with purpose thrive. Most of us would have heard Mark Twain saying when he talked about the 2 most important days in our life. And he said, the 2 most important days are the day you were born and the day you find out why. That's when people find meaning in their lives, magic can happen. So that's really why I joined the company and why I've stayed in this organization for so long. But I now want to go back to what I said I wanted to touch upon. 3 seminal events in my life, in my working life, which have all come together to shape a point of view. The first one is what I call a glorious failure. I call that a glorious failure for, well, I have to be honest. I've had many failures. If you've been around for 30 years, several times you failed, but I've chosen this one for 2 reasons. The first is because it was my first significant failure. And my second reason is probably rising out of that. It was the most that I learned out of that. Now, the year was 2002, 15 years after I joined the company. And I hate to sound immodest, but my first 15 years were good years. I don't think I missed a goal or a target for a year that I had set for myself. Probably met them every year and exceeded them in several years. And that felt good at a point in time, but I realized later how ill-prepared it had made me to deal with what I was going to deal with in 2002 and 2003. Success over 15 years, as I realized, had made me probably a little complacent. And if there were the first 15 years, I had not missed a single goal, the next 2 years, 2002 and 2003, there was nothing that I said that I would do. There was not a single target that I committed to that I was able to deliver. I cannot tell you how traumatic that period was. I cannot tell you how much it shook my belief in myself at that moment. There were periods of serious self-doubt. There were periods when I would get up in the middle of the night and not know what else to do, because in that 2-year period, I'd probably tried everything that I knew, every trick in the trade that I'd learned. I probably worked harder than I'd ever worked before, and yet success was elusive. And like I described, I was going through all of the things that I described to you: trauma, sleeplessness, self-doubt at that moment. And it was in one of those times when I woke up at 3:34, not being able to fall asleep, something happened. Something happened, and I almost, it was like surrendering. I tried everything that was possible, but it was surrendering to a deep inner core and a belief that I had. And I'm embarrassed to say that I did that after exhausting every other alternative. I tried every cute trick in the trade. I tried shortcuts. I tried to get results quickly, and none of them were working. And at that stage, I went back and said, you know what? Just do the right thing. The right outcome will follow. I am embarrassed because this has been a belief for me from the time I was growing up. And yet over a 2-year period, I had lost touch with the score. I did everything but the right thing. I was trying to find shortcuts to long-term success. And I realize now that there are no shortcuts. You want sustainable outcomes, you have to do the right things. The harder right rather than the easier wrong. And I was caught into this trap of the easier wrong. Thankfully for me, when I started doing the right things, results started coming, and they were more sustainable, like I said. But it was a period that taught me many other things. And when I look back, I realize several failings: a degree of complacency coming after my successes. Second, I said, why was I not successful? Was the problem too difficult? Was it? And truth be told, it wasn't such a difficult issue. We didn't require rocket scientists to find out what had to be done, what the problem was, except I wasn't willing to see what was blindingly obvious when I wasn't colored by my desire to get outcomes sooner, faster, and using shortcuts. And that lesson was a very, very significant lesson for me at that moment. Now, fortunately, good outcomes followed. I survived. This continued for a little longer. I might not have been where I was, and I wouldn't be here to tell you the tale which follows. But life continued. Sonali shared with you that I had the good fortune, the privilege of becoming the CEO of the company. And as she said, it was a heady feeling. I never joined this organization thinking I will become the CEO, and I had at a relatively young age at that moment case. And while I pride myself in being grounded and not letting it go to my head, it still was a heady feeling. The expectations that the organization had of me were high. The expectations that I had of myself were high. It was, the first few months was a honeymoon period. And we all know that honeymoons don't last forever. But honeymoons don't always end in a nightmare. In that particular case, my honeymoon was close to ending in a nightmare, because within a few months of my taking over as CEO of the business, we had a global financial crisis that took place. It was 2008. And at the end of 2008, we all know what happened in the world. Again, an extremely difficult period, made more difficult given the position I was in, and the stakes were so much higher. And frankly, it was an incredible period. I had a very supportive boss, but that wasn't the issue. It wasn't the pressure from the boss that was causing the problem. I learned at that moment that falling in your own eyes was tougher than falling in your boss's eyes. Yeah, and that's what I was experiencing at that moment, not being able to live up to my expectations of myself and the hopes that people had of me. I have to say that had I not encountered my first failure, had I not learned the lessons out of the 2002-2003 experience, I would have been wholly ill-equipped to deal with that situation. But I'd learned many things, and I then decided I would put them to bear. But whatever I did, I was struggling to get the results that were needed. And at that moment, I can only say, in life, serendipity has a massive role, or there is a larger reason and purpose, which I can't describe why it happened, because I was reminded of an interaction which I had 10 years earlier. 10 years earlier, in the year 2009, late 1999. And I don't know why I thought of that interaction in the year 2009. I really don't. That interaction that I talk about was an interaction with the professor, Professor C.K. Prahlad, the late Professor C.K. Prahlad. Some of you may know him. He was a management guru, an absolutely incredible person. He was on the board of our company. And I remember the day, an afternoon, just after lunch, he called 4 or 5 of us to the boardroom. And in the boardroom, he asked 4 of us who were sitting there a very elementary question. He asked us, what do you think this company needs more of to be an even greater company? That was the question. I was then relatively young, and so were the others, and we were quite glib in our responses. And we talked about how we needed to be more enterprising, more entrepreneurial. He said, what does that mean? Oh, we gave the usual responses, risk-taking, etc., etc. None of that satisfied the professor. And he kept prodding us. And the professor that he walked back, and there was a flip chart. He picked up a pen and he wrote 2 alphabets on that flip chart. I still vividly remember that moment. And those 2 alphabets that he wrote were A and R. And he once again below that wrote another A and R. And he looked and beamed at us as if that would be sufficient explanation for what he was talking about. Because he kept saying, you say we want to be entrepreneurial. Please explain to me the difference between an entrepreneur and a manager. What's the difference? And none of our responses were satisfying him. I'm going to cut this long story short. He, of course, teased us for much longer. But essentially what he did was in the row above, where he wrote A, he said less than or equal to R. He put an inequality out there. A less than or equal to R was the first row. And in the row below, he said A substantially greater than R. And in the row above, he said, that's a managerial mindset. And the row below, he said, that's an entrepreneur. And he looked at us and said that the only difference between a manager and an entrepreneur is the relationship between these 2 alphabets, A and R, where A stands for ambition or aspiration and R stands for resource. So when you are in a managerial mindset, your thinking goes as follows, where ambition is equal to resource. That's a managerial mindset. We've all been taught to managers manage resources. So when you talk to someone who's in that mindset, and as a boss tells you, you know what, I'm going to reduce your budgets, I'm going to reduce your manpower, I'm going to give you less money to spend. What do you say? Reduce my target. If I say to somebody, I'll give you some more, he says, yeah, sure, I can deliver a little higher target. There is this equality between ambition and resource which guides the way we think. But he went on to say, there is no entrepreneur worth his or her salt. Whoever will allow a relationship and equality between the two. Often an entrepreneur does not have a penny in his pocket, but aims of going to the moon. And even she or he will never alter that goal. And what he went on to describe is that it is this mismatch. It is the mismatch between ambition and resource which forces something interesting to happen. It forces you to innovate. It forces you to find new ways of doing things so that the inequality gets converted into an equality, new ways of using resource such that that ambition is met. And if you were a true entrepreneur, what do you do then? You change your ambition once again so that you constantly live with this mismatch between ambition and resource, because that is almost a necessary condition and a driver of all creativity and innovation. When you are in the A equal to R, many of us think we are innovating in business. But with a mindset of ambition equal to resource, you can never innovate. All you need to do is efficient execution. That's what he said. And we all walked away, to be honest, incredibly impressed at the simplicity and the power of what he had said. But I'm also embarrassed to say that I walked away saying, wow, he said this, but you know what? He's a professor. Professors have these wonderful, interesting frameworks. And I didn't do anything about it. I didn't do anything about it for a 10-year period. And I don't know why this thought came to my mind and why this interaction struck me at that moment, because at that stage, this came to me. And I had this thought, I wonder whether what Professor Prahlad said, which sounded great in theory, does it actually work in practice? Will a massive mismatch between ambition and resource genuinely create magical outcomes and innovation and help address the problem that we've got? And there was no way to find out other than trying. And I decided I would try. And I'm going to share a few numbers, not because the numbers per se have any relevance or whether you will be able to relate to them, but to give you a sense of what aspiration, what audacity, and what mismatch we created and what sort of outcomes came up. Now, for a variety of reasons, which is not germane to what I'm saying, the thought that came to my mind was that probably we will push sales. And in the short term, the quickest way to boost our performance is to expand our distribution. If we could expand our distribution and availability of our goods into more places, probably we will get the fastest return. Now, this was from a company which had unarguably the widest distribution network in the country. We also prided ourselves, we used to go to 1 million stores every week selling our products. And we prided ourselves that every year we kept pushing the boundaries and adding 20, 30,000 more stores every year so that we stayed and expanded our lead over our competitors. Now, having chosen this, the question was, what is an ambitious goal? What is an audacious goal? We were doing 20, 30,000 a year, adding them. Would a stretch target be 40,000? Would it be 50,000? Would it be 75,000? All of them would be stretch goals. And as I narrate this story, it almost sounds foolish when I mention it, because I came up with a number which frankly was downright stupid. The number in my mind was 500,000 more stores, when our track record was adding 20 to 30,000 stores a year. That's what we were geared up for. And I remember talking to people saying, what would happen if we had 500,000 more stores? And people would have looked at me and said, this is the price of senior leadership. Before he became the CEO, he was quite all right. When suddenly he becomes a CEO, he loses touch with reality and he talks absolute nonsense. But for the fact that I had a degree of equity and relationship which had been built over a period of time, I think people would have dismissed this thought. But there was something that was there in the company at that point in time, a heart bled for the difficult situation that we found ourselves in. And people were open to allowing for the possibility, knowing that it wasn't the intent of getting to 500,000. Nobody believed it was possible. What Nitin really means is, let's try and do something significantly bigger than what we thought. Now, it is true that I never imagined you could get to 500,000. Nobody did. But there was something that happened over the next few months, which I can't even begin to describe. At the end of a few weeks and months, when people allowed for the possibility that this can happen, because the stores existed, the outlets existed. We weren't asking people to create stores. I saw different form of energy in the organization. And within the 5-6 month period, people started saying, oh, wow, maybe there is a theoretical possibility. By the time the year was out, we thought maybe we could come close to it. And to cut a long story short, at the end of that year, surprise, surprise, we not just did a lot more than what we had done before, we actually got to the 500,000 stores in that year. The purpose of my telling the story is not that we got to the 500,000 stores. The purpose is that something had happened and I was not able to explain what was happening. How come the same people with the same resources who were working as hard before are still working just as hard? They couldn't work harder. How is it that instead of 20, 30,000 that they were delivering earlier are not delivering this percentage increase, but an exponentially higher outcome was being delivered? What was actually happening? Now, I couldn't explain it, but I had tasted blood. I didn't want to stop it. I didn't know why. But I said, next year, instead of enjoying the 500,000, I said, let's test the boundaries. Let's see what happens. Next year, we said, we will do another 500,000 stores. Yeah. By which time people were enjoying the joy of doing things which none of us believed was possible, was infectious. People embraced that next 500,000 after that first shock in a different manner. Next year, we did 630,000 stores. In a 2-year period, we had doubled the reach which we had, which was built over the previous 75 years. That is the sort of things which happened. And like I said before, I was both troubled, but also excited. I knew something was happening, and I was tempted to see that what was happening in this field, could it happen in other areas? So started a series of human experiments, as I described them. Experiments in supply chain, experiments with a legal function, experiments in different areas of taking goals which are ludicrous, genuinely ludicrous in terms of what you were trying to work towards, with a massive mismatch between ambition and resource. And time again, incredible outcomes started happening. Now, like I said before, I was troubled. And I kept reflecting on what allowed this to be true. And it only satisfied me when the penny dropped and I had an explanation. And I'll spend a minute giving you this, because this is probably the most important thing in this story. I asked myself what might have happened if, instead of talking 500,000, if I'd gone to the head of sales and said, you know, you normally deliver 20 to 30,000 a year. This year, we'll try and deliver 50,000. Chances are that person would have come to me, Nitin, what's wrong with you? Would have shown me a 5-year history. We've only added 20 to 30. We would have gone into some discussion, a rational discussion, a dialogue, and a negotiation. And at the end of the negotiation, we probably would have settled somewhere between the 20, 30, maybe 35,000, 40,000. And he would have convinced me it is a super stretch target. And I would have agreed. Yeah, because it is true. It was a super stretch target if you had set at 40,000. But something different happened when I said 500,000. The one thing that did not happen was no negotiation. Because what do you negotiate? 400,000 is as stupid as 300,000, as 500,000 is. So when you started off with 500,000, there was no negotiation which happened first. Then the question is, why do people negotiate? Why would you negotiate at 50,000 but not at 500,000? You negotiate at 50,000 because that 50,000 is in the same paradigm. He was expected to hit that 50,000, and the person is afraid. All of us are afraid of failing. At 50,000, he had no idea how you could get to that 50,000, and it was expected that 50,000 had to be delivered because it was in the same zone of reference. 500,000 is outside any paradigm. It is a completely different zone. There was no expectation that the 500,000 was met. Therefore, there was no fear of failure. Even before you started, you knew you weren't going to get there. When the fear of failure was removed and you started talking about, let's give it a shot. No one in the world has attempted something like this before. Now think of what juices get generated in you when you're in chasing something which no one in the world has attempted before. Something so pioneering, something so exciting, versus trying to hit a goal where, frankly, the likelihood of getting to that 50,000 is very low. And therefore, even before you start, you're trying to figure out, how can I avoid failing? These are dramatically different outcomes. And I observed that. In the latter phase, when you're working towards the joy of success, I saw creative juices. I saw teamwork. I saw people building on each other. I saw people contributing towards each other. No silos, no one-upmanship, no me versus you. None of that disappeared. It felt a different place. And that's when the penny dropped for me. One of the key roles of a leader is to see how we can shift each one of us out of a fear of failure, which holds us back. And it holds us back and prevents us from even knowing how much capacity and potential we have, to allowing us to experience the joy of doing something pioneering, where the act of working towards it in itself is a reward. The adrenaline is such a joy, where you can work 20 hours and still go back with a spring in your step because you're having fun. That's the difference which we started experiencing. Now, like I said, I tried it in several areas and lots of things happened. But many of us, I don't want it to feel and appear that life is as simple as having an audacious goal, create a mismatch and magic will happen. It will not. Much later, I realized that probably there were a few other things that needed to be true. Few other things needed to be true. And when all those things are true, inevitably magic will happen. Why did magic happen in this particular case? There was a certain, again, serendipity has a big role to play. I realize that when people see meaning in what they do, when people see a larger purpose, when they're driven by a cause which is larger than who they are, that's when discretionary output and effort comes in. Now, realizing all this, I came up with what I call 3 or 4 insights. I will share those and probably bring my talk to an end, and then open it up for any comments, conversations, etc. that you might have. The first is that every person seeks meaning and purpose in their life. There is no one who doesn't seek it. Each one of us seeks it. And therefore, what should be the role of a leader? The role of a leader, and I've now seen, is to create a vision which gives meaning and purpose. But I have been around over 30 years, and I know how short the half-life of any vision that you create in an organization. We have massive conferences talking about visions, rah-rah events which take place. And you know what? Between that event on a Friday and a Monday morning, by the time you're inundated with a new set of emails, half of the energy is gone. And a few weeks later, it only lives in the minds of top management and nobody else. Yeah? A great vision has to be one which meets 2 criteria. It must be collectively inspiring, for sure, collectively inspiring, but it is not enough to be collectively inspiring. It has to be individually relatable. A collectively inspiring vision which is individually relatable, where whether you're a senior manager or someone lower in the organization, each one of us can see how I become a bigger person. I get more meaning in my contribution towards this cause. When that happens, whether you forget that vision or not, people will not let you forget it because you have touched them. It lives because it is bottom up. That's the sort of, and then you have a different energy in the organization. So the first criteria, every person wants meaning and purpose in their life. And therefore we have to find vision which contributes to all of that, which is both collectively inspiring and individually relatable. The second insight for me is that everyone wants to be a hero. Yeah. I don't know of anyone who consciously comes to work in the morning saying, I want to be mediocre today. Yeah. Everyone wants to be a hero. But you know what? Organizations, in the way we work, don't even give people the chance to do something heroic. Yeah. Our process of target setting, our process of evaluation, our process of assessing are all designed towards risk mitigation and avoiding failure. If you succeed, you're relieved. Yeah, you'll get a little more, but are you a hero? No. And because we don't give anyone a chance to be a hero, because we are always operating with this fear of failure, many people can go through their entire lives. It's so sad not knowing how much potential is left untouched in them, unexploited. So what does this mean? It means as a leader, you have an obligation. You have an obligation to create a conscious mismatch between ambition and resource. Because only when there is a conscious mismatch between ambition and resource, there is at least a possibility of some heroic things to take place and for people to fulfill something that they always dream about. That's the second condition which needs to be true. First, a culture, which is what I described, a vision which is collectively inspiring and individually relatable. Second, a conscious and active mismatch which allows for the possibility. It's not that it will always happen, that you can do heroic things. And third, in order to avoid the second point that I made, which is the ambition and resource, a mismatch between ambition and resource, if introduced in the wrong culture, if introduced in the wrong organizational culture, can actually be a debilitating influence. People can feel troubled by it. People can feel a sense of unfairness. They've been done in. So you need a culture. If you want people to experience the joy of success, you need a safe culture. You need a degree of trust where you want people to feel secure. It is only secure individuals who feel safe and trusted and feel that their bosses have their back. They have the chance to go out on a limb and try a few things. Using a cricketing analogy, if you want to hit a six, you have to be prepared to step out of the crease. If you're not willing to fail, you will never win big. I never subscribe to the notion that encourage failure. No, I don't need to encourage failure, but if you want people to win big, you must be willing to accept failure. And therefore, we need this sort of culture to be created. My experience is, firstly, and the fourth point I would like to make, the ability to get all three of these conditions simultaneously is very hard. It is very, very hard. I have spent, for the last several years after I've had this insight, in the constant pursuit of trying to improve my strike rate of how often do I manage to get this, and it's still low. And understanding what it takes to improve the strike rate of having each one of these three conditions coexist at one time is the personal growth and professional journey that I am on. Because I know from empirical evidence that when these three things come together, magic always happens. Our job is to figure out how often can you get these three to come together. That's really it from my perspective. I'm going to pause and hand it back to Sonali and to any of you. Thank you for your indulgence. I know it's a Saturday afternoon, for allowing me the opportunity to share some of my experiences. Like I said, I'm not a student of this subject. I haven't worked, but I have seen some things that have worked for me, certainly. And that's what I thought I'd share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitin. And just going by the comments, I can see that it's us who've been indulged with. You know, there's so many comments out there, and I hope you get to read them later on, Nitin. And we have a lot of curious questions. We have a lot of people who would like to understand a little more. And Veda, maybe we could start with you, and then we'll follow with Pavni.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sonali. Nitin, absolute privilege and honor to hear you. And as a practitioner of organization development, this was like music to the ears to hear your story. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
The question I had, Nitin, is what you shared is fantastic. But as we work with leaders in organizations, the challenge that we have is how do we take or how do we mobilize an entire organization behind an audacious vision? So you did lay out the steps, but sometimes, you know, what a CEO envisions and what happens on the ground, there's a huge gap. So how did you manage to actually take people along? If there's anything you can share in terms of things that worked to, you know, to infuse everyone with the same belief.
I must be honest that some of it was serendipity. I've tried creating visions all my life. Most of them never touched people in the way that I described, but sometimes they do. And I think the insight comes back to what I said. Leaders often are not in touch with the sentiment and the emotion and the feelings of people on the ground. What moves a CEO of the company and what CEO's drivers are, or the top management drivers, can be very different from what motivates, moves, and are the drivers of the rank and file of the organization. Any vision which does not touch them because it doesn't understand them is unlikely to survive. It will be thrust on them. So when we did something like this, by the way, in this particular case, we got lucky. But after that, as I've tried to systemically see what you could do to get there, you have to engage, you have to talk to people. You will be surprised of the different routes that you talk about. How, if you are not so caught up with your own point of view, if you're not so full of yourself that you believe that your idea is the finest idea and there can't be any other alternative, if you're open to the possibility that there are other people who could have a thought that could be better, then frankly, you will talk to people and you will hear them. It is not hard. Problem which we have is we assume just because we become senior, we know it all. Yeah. And then leaders are leading, but there is no one behind following. Yeah.
So true.
Leadership requires voluntary followership. Organizations make you a boss. A boss means You have subordinates, but subordinates don't mean they are followers. Yeah. And that's the only thing I could say. I have no other formula for this.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nitin. And we have Pavni who has a question, and we have Uma, Ramesh, and Nagendra also who are waiting.
Hi everyone. So I was very inspired by your session. I mean, it's true to hear you, and I feel I'm very lucky to be able to attend your session. And me being a young professional, I can totally relate to what you said. Because when our managers and partners, they involve us in their work, we have the motivation to put in the extra effort and do. But when we are usually not made part of the bigger picture, we really don't feel like putting in the extra effort. So that's absolutely correct. But I had one question while you were narrating your story, and you said we got to 5 lakh stores and then 620. So when did you decide that now it's time to stop? And
actually, I didn't. I stopped the story. I didn't stop the effort. The third year, we decided we won't do 500 each year. We will go for 1 million in 1 year. So
okay.
So I didn't stop because, I wanted to push the boundaries to see where is the limit. Yeah. Because 500 was clearly not the limit. The next 500 was not the limit. If I had said 500 in the third year, not even an eyebrow might have been raised in the organization. So we tried doing 1 million. And there are different lessons that I learned, and probably there was a limit out there. And at that stage, I had to assess and judge that as we push ambition and resource mismatch, I think you also have to simultaneously send another message in the organization. You will always do the right thing, that the end doesn't always justify the means. Yeah. And therefore, simply to hit a 1 million number, doing the wrong things is not okay. Yeah. So managing this tension in an organization between pushing people to test your limit, but also establishing clear guardrails and guidance in terms of what's okay, what's not okay, what line we will never cross was the lesson which I got in my third year in terms of doing this, but I didn't stop pushing the boundary.
And one more question I have: do you have any advice for? I'm not sure we have many young professionals here, but do you have any advice for us, which will help us in our journey ahead?
I don't know what advice I'm saying. At my age, I keep telling people I'm not even sure that I can probably say things, but I say to everyone, feel free to completely reject it. The only thing I ask people to do is allow for the possibility. Hear somebody out and then filter it through your own lens, your own worldview, and then decide what you want to, what to take and what not to take. Because my context was different, my lessons were different. The only message I would say to many young people is I find too many people are too obsessed in terms of where they get in their career. They spend too much time trying to plot as to how far will they go and what do they need to do, etc., etc. And I find that it is wholly counterproductive. Just do your job to the best of your ability. And you will get what you deserve. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn, you shouldn't observe, you shouldn't want to grow, you shouldn't have a general idea where you want to go. But the obsessive desire and doing everything simply from the point of view of personal progress. I've seen far too many people do things which are wrong, judgment gets clouded, personal self-interest comes into the way, and perfectly bright and intelligent people go astray.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pavni. And let's have Uma, if you can unmute.
Thank you, Sonali. Well, I would partly like to make one more attempt. Okay, I don't want to spend time in appreciating. I think it's obvious. So since more people can talk, I would just cut down on that. So I think one is, could you say a little more about where you as a person developed to this level, apart from the whole incident that you have quoted of C.K. Prahlad, because as ABS people, it's quite true what you said, that people think they know, and often we encounter chief executives who think they know and only others need to be trained. Somewhere you seem to have, because the way you have articulated shows a lot of self-awareness, and you have been open enough to talk about your own nightmare and so on. So that's one part. If you could talk a little more. Where did you kind of develop this ability to look at yourself and to keep reflecting and learning? And second is, one more time, I would like to ask you to articulate, were there any capability building that you need to do? I'm putting it differently, in your top management. Say, for example, this whole thing of having people having their leaders behind them when they are failing. This is, to me, a capability and competence in leaders which needs to be built. Did you make any interventions, and any ABS played any role? Thank you.
I think it's an absolutely great point. I'd start off, some of who you are, your value system is a function of your upbringing, what you've seen your parents do, the value system that you've had at home. And I was blessed. I was blessed to learn everything that I've know today about governance, corporate ethics, integrity from my father, who probably role modeled what work ethic was and what integrity in public office is. He never used those words, he never said it, but we saw it. Yeah. My mother, probably what it means to take accountability, what it means to learn every day. She started learning and growing at all stages. She went back to college in her late 30s. She started doing new things. She then started learning new languages. After her 60s and 70s, she continues learning computers. So her learning journey has never stopped. And I've seen, observing her, it's never too late. And there is no limit to human potential. So I was blessed to actually observe some of this as I was growing up. That's one. But you know what? When I joined this wonderful company, I had the opportunity to have several interactions, and I'll narrate just 2 examples. We often think that you need some big moments where somebody sits you down and gives you some big insights into what's happening. The 2 incidents which strike me 30 years later were 1 sentences. So I'll give you an example. I had a boss of mine in 1992, or maybe 1993. I had written a proposal. I was a brand manager in the company. I had sent a proposal to my boss. And he hadn't reverted 3 days later. I saw him. I was anxious. I saw him in the corridor. He was probably going to the washroom when I intercepted him and asked him, Harish, what happened? I'd sent you that paper. I haven't heard from you. He spent probably 10 seconds or 5 seconds. Oh, yes, Nitin. Yeah, I've seen it. And he said, yes. And you know what? It's a little short of your usually high standards. That was the one line that he said. It is a little short of your usually high standards. He didn't wait. He didn't elaborate. He didn't make it a big deal. He just walked away. Yeah. I went back and reflected hard. In that one sentence, he had cleverly done 2 things. By saying usually high standards, he made me feel good, that I'm capable of doing great stuff. But equally, he was telling me in polite ways that the work which I had produced was a load of rubbish. Yeah. And I never wanted anyone to feel that I produce chalta hai work just to get by. And a few days later, I said to myself, I have to make a promise to myself. And that promise is that I will never produce work which I am not proud of. It may never be the best in the world. Yeah, because that I can't guarantee. But it is not okay for me to produce work which is short of my ability. That is not about anyone else. And since that day, I have lived with this philosophy. But it was one line which somebody said. And that's why I'm a great believer. I hate this thing that people are taught, oh, try and be the best in the world, try and be the best in the world. Problem is, best in the world is not up to me. It's a function of how good Uma is, how good Mukta is, or Amita is. That's not up to me. But being the best I can be is only up to me. Nobody in the world can take away that right from me. So I find it liberating. I find it empowering. So, but it all happened through this one sentence, which was shared. I'll give you another sentence. It was an annual performance discussion feedback session. And I don't know why this boss of mine looked at me and said some nice things and probably leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling and said, Nitin, I just thought I'd say to you, you know what? Intelligence is such a wonderful quality. It will take you far. Intelligence combined with humility is an irresistible quality. And that's it. The topic changed. He didn't say he found me arrogant. But I went back and said, why did he say that to me? Was I getting too arrogant? Did I do something which is there? And the truth in what he said has never been more apparent. I've seen far too many successful people become simply too arrogant for themselves. Then they're not listening, they're not watching. So I don't know where it comes from, but I've had several such things. And I'm not I learn through reflection. So something like this happens, I reflect on it. And the only thing I say is, I'm a person, I won't try and say I'm a person with above average capability and intellect. I'm not stupid, but I'm not the brightest person. But that's who I am. But that doesn't stop me from trying to be the best I can be. And usually in most jobs which we do, we don't need rocket scientists. Our jobs are relatively simple. They're not complicated. So if you keep your head on you can get to the outcome. So a long answer to your question, but I'd come to the capability building piece. It is so, so important. Now I'll give you an actual example. Over the last 12 months in Unilever, we have decided that we've decided that one of the ways by we will be successful is by embracing diversity and creating an inclusive culture. We want to be, of the three things we want to be famous for, one of them is we want to be a beacon for diversity and inclusion. But we know that diversity without an inclusive culture is meaningless. Then it is only numbers that you're getting in. It's only in the presence of an inclusive culture do diverse people feel comfortable to bring their differences to the table, to come up with different ideas. And that is not easy. One critical capability from a culture point of view is to create psychological safety. So every leadership team, me included, my team would have judged me in a 360 on a host of attributes on diversity and inclusion. We have workshops going on. We all get rated. The top 400 managers in the company have now gone through diversity inclusion training because psychological safety is a necessary condition for bold things to happen, enterprise to happen, innovation to take place, etc. So that's how we are systemically building capability in the organization.
Thank you so much. I mean, I can see a lot of concrete things now that you've done. Thank you.
And I know we're already at time, but Nitin, if you are okay, we'll squeeze in one last question. Yeah, sure. And Ramesh, let's hear from you. And then we'll...
Nitin, hi. Congratulations. And I would call this bravo. I don't have a question really, but I just wanted to make a point here. And the point is that I think you have been a great practicing manager because you were able to link all the 4 elements of Kolb's learning cycle in terms of identifying and working with your concrete experiences and then observing and reflecting over them, conceptualizing it for yourself, and then, of course, applying it. Most practicing managers seem to be lacking in one or the other place out of these 4. But through your story, what I could capture was that all these 4 elements were repeatedly present. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramesh, so much for picking that up and pointing that out. And, when I was speaking to Nitin, that's what he said. I have no concepts to talk about. I have no theories to talk about. So maybe I don't belong there. But I think just the whole application of it, which is where the rubber meets the road, and which is the difficult part, which you can't get in books, that's the one that you've shared with us. And thank you so much for that. I know, Nitin, we have a lot more people who want to ask you questions, and I'm wondering whether they can email you, ask you some. Will that be okay with you?
Sure.
If that's
Yeah,
okay,
that's fine.
if you could share your email address, that'd be very helpful. And can't be more thankful to you. Just thank you so much for being here. I know your schedule is crazy, but you made time for us right from the beginning. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And I just see the messages. There's so much of inspiration you've created for so many of us, which is something you've been doing throughout. So it continues, the track record continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.